Hello, and welcome to Pathways Youth and Family Services training on disaster and emergency planning. Before we get started with this training, please make sure that you have one test per person. If you're a licensed Pathways family, you can locate this in the family web located in Extended Reach. Where the link to this training is, there's also a link to the test. Remember that it is one test per person. You have to show your own individual competency. Following this training, you will turn your test into your Pathways Family Specialist for credit. Getting started, the purpose of disaster planning, this is number one on your test if you're following along with your test, and our test kind of moves around just a little bit, to prepare for internal and external emergencies. That's kind of what you want to use for the answer to your test question, but it also includes acts of nature such as flood, hurricanes, fires, and tornadoes, chemical or hazardous material spills, critical equipment failure, weapons of mass destruction events, acts of terrorism, and events requiring evacuation or quarantine. Now, do remember, as a licensed foster parent, if there is a recommended evacuation, you do have to evacuate. That is state licensing regulations, so we want to make sure that you do follow through with that. Whether it's recommended or it's ordered, we have to follow through. So please don't think there's a hurricane coming, there's a chemical spill, something's happening, and that you can shelter in place until it's over with. We do need you to follow through with that recommendation. Training regarding emergency procedures. This is number 2 on your test. The disaster and emergency plan will be reviewed quarterly with verified and certified homes, and when any change in address, construction, or emergency phone numbers occur. Once per quarter, Pathways will conduct your quarterly review. During that quarterly review process, we will ask you about your disaster plan, if you still have the same evacuation routes, the same locations that you would evacuate to, the same emergency contact phone numbers of individuals that we could contact that would know your whereabouts. We also would need to change that Pathways disaster plan anytime that you move. If you're selling your home and purchasing another one, or you're moving from one apartment to another, we need to make sure that we're updating that disaster plan accordingly. The role of Pathways staff and foster families during emergency and disasters are to maintain the safety and placement of all children in our care. This is number 2 on your test again. If you feel that I'm speaking too quickly, you can always pause this video and rewind. So if you need to go back and catch something, feel free to do that. When it comes to communication, when evacuating during an emergency, families must make every effort to contact Pathways and communicate their location. So please make sure that you are reaching out to your Pathways Family Specialist or their supervisor and letting them know where you are and that you're safe. When there's lead time, and this is number 4 on your test, we're skipping number 3, we'll go back to that, but number 4 on your test, when there's lead time in preparing the information needed when calling Pathways corporate office, or we're going to need to know your current location. The foster parent's name. Our corporate headquarters or our local Pathways offices may not know you like they do on a local level. So you will have to give your information to them, your name, and most importantly, the child's name, and how to contact the family and the child. Not only your cell phone number that you're calling from, but are you staying at a hotel, what that phone number and room number may be? If you're staying with a family member, do they have a landline or a cell phone number? So that if we're not able to get through to you, we have an alternate method of getting in contact with you. The health and physical status of all family members. We want to make sure that when you evacuated, was anybody hurt, injured? Did everybody leave with the appropriate medication, clothes, those things that you're going to need in that evacuation? of that disaster. If there's any immediate needs, did you leave the home? Did a child leave a prescription medication behind? If that medication is a prescription medication that is psychotropic in nature, we can use our Mosaic uh, psychiatrist to call that information in and have it refilled and called into a local pharmacy so that you can pick that up. Regular medications like antibiotics, penicillins, emergency things like asthma inhaler, insulin, EpiPen shots, those are things that we would need to reach out to the child's pediatrician to have them call in new orders and refills again to that location that's nearest you. Even if that pediatrician or treating physician is in a community that had to evacuate, they usually have an on-call service where we can get through and maybe be connected to another doctor so that we can get those needs taken care of. If you did evacuate to another community and you're in need of clothes, there are many different clothing closets and foster care resources across the state that we can connect you with so that we can make sure those needs are being met. In the event of a disaster, this is number 8, if you want to jump down to number 8 on your test. In the event of a disaster or emergency situation, you should contact Pathways staff immediately to report your family's status. DFPS may also contact the Pathways corporate office at 830-257-3951 for status reports and information on the location and conditions of the children in care. So they will check in with us on a daily basis, and we have to report daily to them the status of our families, if they evacuated, what are their health concerns, are there any needs of that child, but we have to make sure that we are reporting that information on a daily basis back to CPS. If the corporate office cannot be reached, please refer to the Pathways website for contacts to other offices. If you go to our Pathways website at www.pathway.org, in the upper right corner, it says Contact Us. Click that, and it will show you all of our offices across the state, their addresses, and their phone numbers. You can contact any office, and they're going to have the same ability to access your information through the database that we utilize. So you can use those other offices as well as the Pathways corporate office in Kerrville. When we're preparing our children for disasters, children's fears also stem from their imagination, and you should take these feelings seriously. Your words and actions provide reassurance. Feelings of fear are healthy and natural for adults and children, but as an adult, you need to keep control of the situation. When danger is past, concentrate on the child's emotional needs by asking them what upset them most. Having children participate in the family's recovery activities will help them to feel their life will return to normal. So we do need to make sure we're asking them, are they scared? How do they feel? Getting them to voice what is on their mind so that we can help them through this process. When we're preparing children for disasters, we also have to be aware, and this is number 5 on your test. Be aware that after a disaster, children are most afraid that the event will happen again. Someone will be injured or killed. They will be separated from the family, or they will be left alone. So what we have to remember, our children are pulling on their past life experiences. Their past life experiences, when there was trauma in their life, CPS became involved, that child was removed from their family, and sometimes they were separated from their brothers and sisters. So a lot of their fears are going to stem from that past life experience of being separated from you or their current siblings that they're with. So we need to make sure that we are addressing these and talking to them and not just handling the disaster at hand and talking to other adults and talking over the top of the children, but making sure that we're including them in this process as well. When you're creating a disaster plan with Pathways, we will provide you a 2-page disaster plan. So we have all of the information on the disaster plan. You just have to fill in the correct locations and information that pertains to your home environment, residence, or community. So it's very important that as you're creating your disaster plan, find out what can happen to you. If you're moving to a new community that you're not as familiar with, contact your local Red Cross or emergency management office and ask them what types of disasters are most likely to happen and request information on that. Learn about your community's warning signals. I know in North Texas, where we tend to see more tornadoes, they have a siren system that is heard throughout the community. If you're moving from South Texas, where you probably never see tornadoes, to North Texas, this would be something that may be relatively new to you. And the southeast side of Houston, we tend to see more refineries and plants, and sometimes we have chemical spills, and they too have a system, a siren system that you can hear outside. So it's important to know what your community's warning signals are. Ask about animal care after a disaster. Most shelters do not allow animals. So if you don't have a place that you're evacuating to, like a relative's home, and you plan to evacuate to a local school or church that's designated as a disaster shelter, make sure that you do reach out and find that information out ahead of time about pets. If they do not allow pets, then you need to make other arrangements, either for yourself or for the pet. Find out how to help elderly or disabled people, whether they live in your home as a household member, their neighbors, or family members that you're helping to care for. Make sure that you know how to care for them, not just evacuating them to a shelter, but sometimes there are nursing homes that will take in elderly or disabled people because they're equipped with medical equipment, the nursing staff, and different medications that may be required for them. Find out about the disaster plans at your workplace. If you're in a multi-story building, know where the stairwells are, how to evacuate if there was a fire or tornado, and those shelter-in-place areas that are best going to keep you safe if there was a tornado and you needed to cover. Also, as we're creating that disaster plan, we want to discuss the types of disasters that are most likely happen to you with your children and household members. Discuss that with them. Also, we want to pick 2 places to meet outside of the home. One of those, and this is number 6 on your test, one of those is going to be right outside of the home in case of a sudden emergency like a fire. If there was a fire, many times first responders will encourage you to pick a local meeting place next door to your home and not across the street. If we pick a spot across the street and we teach a child to go to the front to the tree at the neighbor's house across the street, as that child is fleeing from that fire, they may not think to look both ways. And as people are driving by that are looking at what's happening, or first responders are pulling up, that child could be struck by a vehicle. So we want to make sure that that meeting space is next door. That could be your next door neighbor's tree in the front yard, a mailbox, a sidewalk, their front door, but a meeting place that all of the family members know where to go. And then we also want to pick somewhere outside of the home or neighborhood in case you can't return home. Everyone must know your address and phone number. So if there's a place within your subdivision or neighborhood, if you're in a subdivision, you may have a park where there's a community pool or a clubhouse that is easy for them to identify. Is there a church, a school, a convenience store within your neighborhood? If you live in a more rural area, is there a specific meeting place that everybody can identify easily outside of the home to know where to go, that's not immediately outside of the home? If you're in an apartment complex, that could also be the front office, the clubhouse, or maybe even the gate that leads to the pool. So that way it's just a spot that everybody knows where to go. You also may want to ask an out-of-state friend to be your family contact. After a disaster, it's often easier to call long distance. Other family members should call this person and tell them where you are, so that way that information can be communicated back to Pathways. In 2000, I don't remember the year, but I want to say it was Hurricane Rita. We had to evacuate from Houston to anywhere in Texas, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas. Hurricane Katrina had recently happened in New Orleans, and then Hurricane Rita was coming. So people mass evacuated. I remember it taking us 12 hours from Houston to Dallas to evacuate. During that time, our cell phones did not pick up reception and our text messages were not going through. So sometimes if you can get through to that family member that may live outside of that area, it's easier for them to relay that information back to Pathways. You also want to make sure that you discuss what to do in an evacuation and plan how to take care of pets with your family members. When you're creating your disaster plan, put together a checklist. On that checklist, we want to teach children how to make emergency phone calls. Many of us don't have landlines like we used to. We rely more on cell phones. So if you do have a landline, wonderful. You may want to put a sheet of paper near the phone that shows the constable's department, police office, fire department, the ambulance, poison control, those different phone numbers that they know how to pick up the phone and call. But we also want to teach children how and when to call 911. For those of us that don't have landlines and we rely strictly on cell phones, we want to be able to show our children, because so many times we have them password protected, how to swipe up on the phone and access that emergency call system. That way they can access 911. Again, this is where we want to make sure children know the address that you live so that they can relay that information to those first responders. Show each family member how and when to turn off utilities such as water, gas, or electricity at those main switches. During Hurricane Harvey in Houston, it was a hurricane, but we did not sustain hurricane force winds. So many families did not lose electricity. It was flooding that was the disaster at hand. So homes that were being flooded, the water was coming in, it was coming up over the electrical outlets and electrocuting people when that water became electrified. So this is definitely where we want to teach children and family members how to access the breaker box, where it is, and how to open it and how to shut off those breakers to that electricity. Also with water, if you remember the freeze that we experienced statewide a couple of years ago, this is where you may want to show the family members where the main water valve is to your home to turn that off and to be able to bleed the pipes to drain the water so that there's no freezing of the pipes and burst pipes in those situations. We want to make sure that we check to make sure insurance coverage is current. Our Pathways database is set up that it's going to show we get an alert that your insurance expires 30 days prior to the expiration date. That way we can start notifying you ahead of time so that we can get copies of your new auto insurance, homeowners, or renters insurance. Get training on how to use the fire extinguisher. If you've never used one before, if you contact your local fire department, they will show you how to use the fire extinguisher and point the hose in a sweeping manner. Depending on the type of fire, whether that's a grease fire, electrical fire, or a wood fire, on how to put that fire out. You can also get that information by doing a YouTube search, or if you're a TikTok subscriber, there's some videos on there as well. Smoke detectors, we want them to be located on each level of your home. If you have a multi-story home, like a 2-story home, or some of our families live in a 3-story townhome, they do have to be located on every floor of the home, as well as every bedroom and open area of the home. When our fire marshals come to do your fire inspection, they usually look in the bedrooms, hallways, and kitchen are the big areas that they're going to target those smoke detectors. Make sure that you stock emergency supplies and disaster supply kit. When you're looking at our Pathways disaster form, towards the bottom of the first page, there's a lot of check boxes on there that gives recommendations of what your emergency supplies and disaster supply kit should look like. So that way you can know in the event of an emergency what you're going to need. Keep CPR and first aid current. Again, this is usually due every 2 years if you take it from the American Heart Association or Red Cross. Our system too is set up 30 days before that expiration date. It will alert us so that we can notify you to update your CPR first aid as well as your support providers. Determine the best escape route from the home and review that with your children. Identify safe places in your home for each type of disaster, like a tornado or flood. Again, review that with your family members. Develop a plan for making sure you have necessary medical supplies and equipment, especially for our children or family members that need those medical supplies. How do we transport them? Also, medications that could be prescription medication for anybody that may have a psychotropic medication or things that are ongoing medical conditions. When also creating your disaster plan, practice and maintain that plan. I think this is number 7 on your test. We want to make sure that you quiz your children every 6 months. Go through with them, talk to them about if there's a fire, how to fill their bedroom door for heat, smoke coming under the door to place a blanket, towel, a pillow in front of the door so that the smoke's not coming out from under it. We also want to make sure that we are teaching them how to get down low because smoke rises. We want to make sure that they know those evacuation routes. If you have a 2-story home and that child needs to escape from a window, the fire marshal will recommend that you have an escape ladder as well. We want to replace stored water and food every 6 months. Make sure that you do have that those water bottles and canned food so that if you go without electricity or gas or water, you do have those available to you. Test and recharge your fire extinguisher annually. This is a licensing standard. What we usually do is when you purchase your fire extinguisher and you provide us the receipt, we go 12 months from the date of purchase. So you either have to buy a new fire extinguisher to replace that one or have it tested and recharged by a professional. Test your smoke detectors monthly and change batteries every 6 months. So you always want to reach up and push the button, whether you can reach it with your finger or use a broomstick to make sure that the alarm is going off, that the batteries are fully charged. And you want to look at if you have a CO2 detector as well, but change those batteries every 6 months. We used to say every time we changed our clocks, whether we sprang forward or fall backwards. Now we're not going to do that anymore. So it kind of took one of our little indicators away there, but do make sure you're changing out those batteries accordingly. With fire extinguishers, per licensing standards, a foster home must have a fire extinguisher in each kitchen of the home. Most of our homes have one kitchen, and each level of the home. If you had a 2-story home, one would be downstairs in the kitchen, the other one would be located upstairs. The fire extinguisher must be serviced or replaced after each use. So if you did use that fire extinguisher, you're going to have to buy a new one. Or if you just used a small portion of it, having it checked by a professional to see if it can continue to be used and the pressure and those types of things with it. Have a maintenance check once a year by a person qualified to inspect fire extinguishers. If you cannot do that, then it's actually replacing the fire extinguisher as a whole. It's not a licensing standard, but it's a state fire marshal checklist requirement that the fire extinguisher has to be 5 pounds or larger. So do make sure when you're purchasing that fire extinguisher that it is 5 pounds or larger. Best case practice. It's a good idea to mount the fire extinguisher on the wall by a hanger or bracket, with the top of the extinguisher no higher than 5 feet above the floor, and the bottom at least 4 inches above the floor or any other surface. If a state or local fire authority has different mounting instructions, we can follow those instructions. Whenever you have your fire marshal inspection of your home, if that fire marshal, that professional says that you do not have to hang your fire extinguisher and they say that you can have it in the pantry or under the kitchen cabinet to where it's easily accessible, that's where we're using that fire marshal's recommendation as they're approving your fire inspection, that we can have that not necessarily hung, but easily accessible. Disaster and emergency questionnaire. This is number 3 on your test. If you jump back up to number 3, we kind of skipped that one. Each family will complete a disaster planning questionnaire at the time of verification. So we do this with all of our families as we're licensing them. And this has to be updated at least once a year during the quarterly inspection process. Our families are set up that we teach the disaster planning training during the 4th quarter of every year. So during that 4th quarter is where we're going to have you update your disaster plan to make sure that everything is current. We're also going to have you conduct your evacuation routes where we observe it and time how long that it takes for the family members to come out of the home. Licensing standards state that it has to be 2 minutes for everyone to evacuate the home. If you have an infant or a child with medical needs, instead of running out of the home with that infant or transporting that child with medical needs in a practice, we can use a pillow in that situation so that we can show the appropriate time in which we can evacuate the family. And then also with the disaster and emergency questionnaire, as you're filling it out, remember that you're going to have to list 2 places for evacuation. One of those are going to be right outside of your home, like a fire in the event of an emergency. The other one is going to be somewhere within your neighborhood. We also would like for you to list 3 people. You only have to list 2, but it's great to list 3 people to contact who will know your whereabouts in the event of an emergency. Identify 2 safe places in your home in the event of a tornado or flood. We also need to know your pharmacy and contact information for prescription medication. That way, if you do evacuate without medication, we can get that called back in. The primary care physician for the children, so that again, we can reach out to them for those needs. 2 meeting places outside of the home. And how to ensure medication and medical equipment will be made available to children in an emergency. So those are the things that we will need to know in the event of an evacuation, a disaster, that you're going to be filling out on that disaster plan. So that concludes the disaster and emergency planning training. Hopefully you were able to get all of your test questions as we were going today. If you did not, go back, rewind, slow things down, push pause so that you give yourself time to be able to fill that out. Once this training is concluded, please remember to turn your test into your Pathways Family Specialist. They're going to upload that to your file and put your certificate with it so that you can get credit for this training. If you have any questions, we always want you to reach out to your Pathways Family Specialist and their supervisor first, because they're more familiar with your family, your needs, the layout of your home, and where you live versus somebody outside of your area. But you are more than welcome to reach out to me, Scott Batson. My email address is sbatson@pathway.org, and I will answer the questions to the best of my ability or accessing that information from your local office. Thank you again for joining us for this training. Hopefully it was informative and you got all of your test questions and have some takeaways today. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you around.